Hello, everyone. My name is Gustavo Hinojosa. I'm the director for the National Cybersecurity Student Association. I'd like to thank everybody for attending this webcast today. So our featured presenter today is Dr. Jonathan Yerby. He's the director of cybersecurity programs and associate professor at Mercer University. So his presentation today will be on tactile cybersecurity, why physical devices still matter in the digital world. At this time, I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Yerby. You're on mute.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for doing that. So today I'm going to be talking about something that I think we've kind of left behind or we've assumed, and that's thinking about the physical in our increasingly virtual world. So in the rush to virtualize everything, to move online, to use cloud labs, to use all of the benefits of virtualization, I think we've lost touch a little bit, uh, literally lost touch with the hardware, literally moved past some of the fun activities, some of the critical thinking, some of the troubleshooting skills that can be gained through hardware. And so that's really what I'm going to be focused on uh, in this. The thing that we're going to be covering today is how virtualization and online has kind of moved us past what was the way that many education programs started off with, where you spent more time touching hardware, understanding uh, how computers operate, and then I'll talk about some of my own trials and tribulations and evolution with this type of issue. Then we'll look at how some of the how physical devices matter in the real world. Uh, what are some of the challenges that institutions face in trying to implement something like this? And then what are the broader implications to if we do this or choose not to do this on the workforce, on the individual students, and what effects it's going to have on them. And then we'll end with a couple of calls to action of maybe some ideas of something that you might be able to implement in your institution. Okay, so this is where we're at now. That online is more popular than it's been in a really long time across the nation. That we are spending time moving to more complex topics quickly. I think many schools, many professors or programs are assuming that they've picked up this basic stuff previously. Uh, but then I think that we're seeing across the nation that we're having students come in all across the board. Some of our students do come in and they have been playing with computers or hardware for years. But we have plenty of students that come in and they don't know, they've never looked inside of a computer. They've certainly never built a computer. The whole concept of building computers is less popular now than it was 10 years ago. But we just assume it and we skip past it in many institutions. And so we assume that that simple stuff is already understood. And by us skipping past that, there is a decline in some of those hands-on skills, some of that kinetic learning, and some of the ability for students to encounter problems and work their way through them. So going through some of my background of how did I kind of I realize that this is something that I was doing. I was certainly assuming that okay, the inside of a computer is super easy, right? Of course, everybody's done this, and so I had some kind of wrong assumptions. I was teaching at an institution where we had a very high online presence, and we had plenty of students that were fully online, fully at distance, maybe out of state, out of country. And so we really didn't have the bandwidth or the desire to do hardware more than what I'll show you later of how I used to do it, where I might have the hardware and I might show them some pictures or some videos, but the students were never actually getting their hands on the gadgets. They were never actually doing the work that we might do in the classroom. Uh, so I went through several years of teaching face-to-face and online, and then in 2021, I moved to an institution that is very traditional, where we don't have online classes. And so all of my students are on campus, they live on campus, they are in my labs constantly. And I was also granted a decent budget and told to, do something interesting. And so with the requirement of the students are here, it didn't really make a lot of sense for me to do lots of online labs, to have them going to any sort of cloud labs or hosted environments. And so we have a cyber lab, that's what's the background of this, where we'll set up actual networks, they'll work on actual cabling, real hardware, and some of the hardware, uh, the pros and cons of maintaining all of this is it does require more people power to keep those labs up and running, but it also gives us a chance to troubleshoot when some of the older stuff might break, or we get new stuff that might not have the same compatibility. And so it gives us a lot of learning that I would not have gotten otherwise if I were just doing all online. So through doing online or hands-on um, experiments and research, I've been able to also work with students through the years where I'm able to build labs. So I have one of these papers is um, using digital forensics and active learning, where I was able to have student assistants that came into my labs and helped build the labs. I built network labs. I've done one where we took several Raspberry Pis and connected those to a switch and created kind of like a very small, low-level supercomputer. It's really doing parallel processing. And so we're able to do a lot of out-of-the-box, new types of research and projects that would be difficult if I weren't doing it with physical tools. And so some of the things that I like to do to bring the hardware in, some of the very traditional things that I think schools probably are still doing is starting with simple things of looking at the inside of a computer, building cables. The pictures that I have on this slide, this is a different lab that we have where we call this one the garage. And it's really, you can see the machines in this one, we take a lot of our depreciated equipment and we put it in the garage. And students are mostly for their free time invited to go in and come up with interesting experiments, work on the inside of computers, replace drives. They can essentially like Frankenstein a computer together. And then we'll also have them do, or we'll just give them essentially freedom to do whatever they want. They're not really held down to what they're allowed to do. So one of the interesting ones that a student came up with about 2 semesters ago is they built a computer in an aquarium, and they filled the aquarium with mineral oil, and they had the computer running completely immersed in an aquarium full of oil. And so it was just something neat to do in that lab. We have several other lab spaces. This is a different one. This one's called a creativity lab. And so in this one, we work with the students to ask what they would be interested in doing. And so we have 3D printers. We have a green screen place, recording area where they can do multimedia, including they have a couple of different VR headsets, and then they have a place there they can do podcasts. There's a glow forge. The picture down at the bottom is a project some students were working on. They were working across out of our department with psychology. And so that little device at the bottom, it was a prototype for a rat mobile where some psychology students and some computer science students were working to build a drivable uh, car that we could put a rat in, a real rat, and they could train the rat to drive, and then he could get rewarded with. They went back and forth to trying to figure out what was more rewarding. Was it little sugar pellets or was it cocaine? And they figured out the sugar pellets were a better long-term solution. And so that was just another little interesting project where the students just really get a extra level of learning when they move into this kinetic tactile world. And inside that cyber lab that was in the background a moment ago, there's a variety of devices, and some of it's a mess because this is always a working lab. We like to bring in new stuff and old stuff, especially as we're working to understand kind of some proven vulnerabilities. Some of the newer stuff sometimes is more difficult we're not finding zero-day attacks necessarily. Um, but we are finding proven attacks. And one of the other projects on that previous slide, where it had some of the research papers, is I did have a group of students that built an entire SIM system where they were monitoring attacks. They deployed a honeypot or a honey net, and that we were welcoming in attacks, and they would grab those exploits where attackers were trying to attack the honeypot. They would take those offline to a machine that was air gapped. There was no internet connection to it by USB, and then they would use RIMNUX to try to uh, understand the binaries of different attacks. And so through some of that work, they were able to find some active ransomware attacks, and then they can take those keys or the binaries, report it to like virus total, get it indexed into some Yara rules, and then get that pushed out to real world protection. And so some of it we are finding like real right now attacks, and then some of it we're taking like this D-Link camera in the bottom left corner, where I needed some old type of device where we could try to do attacks like poisoning the firmware. Tried this on newer devices and did not have any success, but keeping around some old stuff is both cost efficient and it gives us the way to have students still tackle a complex problem, understand what is still possible, but admittedly much more difficult, and complete some hardware-based attacks. Oh, this is the one I just spoke about. I forgot I had this other slide. All right, and so this is that system that I just mentioned a moment ago, where they had this system to bring in those binaries and then monitor it and then go report it out. And so we can see these are two of the young men that did that project and had that up and running. Another lab that we have is an IoT lab. And so this one is pretty interesting. This gives us this one is much less defined of what the purpose is, and so we're constantly working to figure out exactly how do we use this in a cyber program, in an IT program, in a computer science program. So we have lots of smart devices, and so far we've focused more on automation and communications using um, some if this then that type scenarios. We've tried to find some cyber related integrations, but what we found is that the new commercial, big name popular devices, they are much more difficult to exploit than we've found in the past. And so we haven't had a ton of success actually exploiting these, but the students are still learning by trying and working over and over to see if they can take some of what has worked in the past and try it against the new devices. And so it's even though we're not saying, the fridge, the smart fridge here is now, owned or whatever, or the microwave is now going to run 24 hours a day. We have not been able to do things like that. Uh, but they're still learning about, what are the protocols that they're working on? How would I monitor these? What are the things that I could look out for? And so I don't think that if we thought about this in a scenario where all of my students were online and learning virtually, I don't think that they would have this. I know that we can simulate some stuff in programs like Packet Tracer, but I don't think it gives us anywhere near the connection mentally when it is a predictable lab of spin up this simulation, click the 12 steps that I'm going to ask you to click and write up your lab report. This is real, so we'll spend time in here and we don't know exactly what we're going to find, and even when we find that we didn't get anything, we still found something, right? And so it's just kind of like doing a research study. At the end of your study, even if your results are there's no differences, well, that's your results. You still found something, right? So overall, the feedback from students, asking them, do you guys enjoy, getting all of these gadgets and doing this very applied, hands-on um, type of learning? Is that they seem to really love it, especially when we give them time to hit against those frustrations of, hey, it didn't work right the first time. Well, that's fine. I want to build an environment where they have time to work on things, they have permission, they have the resources, and then that it is messy and they are going to fail. I want to build that persistence. I want to build that troubleshooting. I want to build that they're not going to easily give up. And so for almost everyone, almost all of my students, they find that pretty engaging and they find that fun. There are a couple who do get frustrated because there's often no steps, especially when I think about doing this in an upper level class where like I have a essentially an ethical hacking class where we'll spend some part of the semester doing lots of software tools in what's a pretty predictable environment, and then we'll spend about a third of the semester working on hardware tools where they'll work in small groups and they'll be given a device. I use a lot of the Hack 5 devices just because they are um, predictable enough that they have good documentation to get started, but there's still real world devices that can still do real world good for a pen test or real world bad as a bad actor. And their instructions will be super vague of do something neat or do something valuable, do something complex. And they're given time to do that. And I'll be walking around and working with each little group and see that some groups they have trouble narrowing their scope because they want to do everything. And then I'll have other groups, they'll be flustered because they have a device and they don't know what they're supposed to do with it. And so that's their challenge is to figure out, well, what can you do with it? Like, what are you going to do with it? Right. And so the practical um, lessons learned is that I think we really have to not assume that our students are coming to us with hardware skills that they've done this before. That it does take some time from the professor to build in that time for them to fail, to build in that space for them to not have an easy solution. I think that builds their troubleshooting skills. It builds their resilience. I think having those physical, tactile experiences really improves their ability to think, to troubleshoot, um, and then I think that they get a richer experience, getting a deeper understanding of what are all of these things. Like, let me go actually look at the actual switch and the router and the cabling and from the PC up to radio waves, to have an understanding of well, what is here, and if I understand how wireless is working better, then maybe they're going to be able to better protect it. These are a couple of videos. Let's see, I don't know playing them over the Zoom will work, but this is just a quick one where I had a student do one on this little device called a Wi-Fi nugget. And so he really had fun going through and creating a way to do several different types of attacks with uh, with some of this device. This was a really cheap device. I think it was like $70. And so it's not a huge investment in cost, and the students are really engaged. The other video I have down here is a student they were working with the Flipper Zero, and so this was one of my groups that was initially flustered because they had so much to do. And this young man, he had a fantastic quote when one of his classmates was asking him, um, what do you do with it? He said, it's like asking a chef, what can you do with an egg? And he said, what can't you do? And so their challenge was narrowing their scope and figuring it out. And so this young man, he actually ended up going and buying one for himself. So they had two, and they did a couple of different things where they used both of them. But it was just really neat to see that spark and that it came alive and it made it real as they worked through some of these. Now, how I did this in the past, where I didn't have my students in a classroom, um, I would do lots of kind of what you see here on the screen. So I would go through and I would have some of the hardware and I would go in and I would operate it and I would record videos and I would just be showing them like, here's the Wi-Fi nugget. I'll be like, this is this thing, this is how you do it. And then I would kind of record little demos, and that's not terrible. It is one way to do it. I've looked at other instances at other institutions of how can they get hardware into students' hands. And so some of the other possible ideas are low cost kits, maybe that you send out to students or that you ask students to buy like you would their textbook. I know I've seen chemistry courses online and biology courses online where they have students buying like some very basic chemicals, and they have students buying some like I've seen where in a biology course they have to buy I think they're called owl pellets, where it's essentially, I think it's what the owl has eaten and left behind, and the students are at their house dissecting owl pellets for their biology class online. And so if chemistry and biology can do things like that, I think that if we have courses that we don't have a choice, that our students are at distance, then we could find the most basic, most valuable kits and figure out a way to have them purchase them or rent them, or we send them to the students the same way we might to any other thing. Um, we can do things like remotely controlled labs. So maybe we have something where you have a server at your campus, and maybe the students can't really come and touch that server. So maybe you set up ways for them to remote in and still provide administration. And so they don't get to really touch it, but they're still touching the keyboard that's touching a real machine. And they can, I think, connect the dots there to a degree. Um, we can do some advanced simulations and then pair that with some reflections to intentionally ask the students, okay, so you did this virtual simulation. Now let's pair that with a reflection to get a little bit more out of it and say, what would that look like if that was in your hands, if you were touching this item? And so even if we can't get to that point of putting that device in their hand, if we can just have them think about it, of what would you do? What could be different if you were holding this device, if you were operating and handling the device? And so there's definitely differences versus in person versus online. Um, and I think in person, I think the biggest challenge comes to just time and money. And so doing it in person, it's just making that decision to invest that time and to, if you can, invest that money. But I'm going to show you that the money isn't as expensive as it might seem. So some of those Hack 5 devices, you can see some of the prices on the screen. I'm not saying that they are free, but I am saying that they're not thousands of dollars. And you can have multiple students sharing devices, right? So I can get, one key crock or one screen crab or one OMG cable, and I can have three students working together on that. Even if I need to rotate groups or rotate timing to maximize the usage of my resources, I can have multiple people working on these for not extraordinary cost. Not saying it's no cost, but not extraordinary. But then you might say, well, even if I can get the money and I can get the time, I'm going to have bureaucracy to deal with. And that's going to vary greatly by campus. And so I've definitely faced that challenge in previous situations of somebody saying, you're going to give these students what that can do what on this network. And so the institution, without a good understanding and good buy-in, they might have some hesitance to you even thinking about bringing some of these devices on campus. And so that takes some education and some buy-in to explain to the institution that this is what our graduates need to be able to do. This is the world that they're going to be graduating in. We want our graduates to be ready to hit the workforce with current skill set, to be competitive in the workforce. And it really helps drive retention and engagement as well, because if the students are at your institution and they're getting some really neat experience, then why wouldn't they want to continue on? Why wouldn't they want to to um, to be in that program? And so you have to get past that bureaucracy hurdle, and you have to work alongside your IT security people. And so if I'm doing something where I'm going to be interfering with the university wireless, I give them a heads up. I ensure that my students understand the ethics of what they're doing, and we'll name things like do not connect to this network. And so that'll be the SSID, so that we're not going to actually attack somebody innocent or break any laws. And so we spend a good bit of time before, during, and afterwards uh, going over any legal repercussions, any ethical issues, and to make sure that they know what's allowed and what's not allowed. And I'll even have students sign contracts that they're going to essentially, it's a two-page document, but the boiled down version is don't do anything stupid, don't do anything illegal, and don't ruin it for me or for you. And so going this path for 3 or 4 years now, I haven't had any issues with anybody doing anything stupid or illegal. And so I cross my fingers and knock on wood every day that that continues, that I have good, responsible students using these powerful uh, tools or toys. Sometimes I'll call them one thing or the other. And then just let them know that just because you have this powerful device, that doesn't mean that there's no guardrails, or there's you can do anything, right? So they're really held to a a standard of you have some great power, now you have great responsibility. And so I hope that continues to be the issue. The next thing I kind of hit on earlier is the time. So when things are undefined, or when we're doing uh, projects where they're given a lab, or they're given um, a piece of hardware and they don't have the instructions, they don't have the end goal, they will struggle. And I kind of like that. I really want them to struggle some, because it really helps them grow. Right. And so I'm a big believer in growth mindset. And so I'm there as a coach and a like, you can do it, don't give up. I'm glad it's not easy. If it was easy, then what would be the point, right? Let's keep going, and do something hard, do something impressive, do something interesting. And so some of those videos where I played earlier, where some of the students, they did something impressive and they're like, "Wow, can I record this and put it on YouTube, because I think this is super interesting." And when I was trying to learn how to do it, there were no good tutorials out there. Nobody else had looked at the Wi-Fi nugget, right? Or the two videos I could find were essentially just somebody unpacking it, and nobody knows how to operate it. Nobody's posted a video. And so I'm like, yeah, absolutely, go for it. And so the students really enjoy being kind of one of the authorities, not only in our classroom and in our program on that device, but also the authority, at least publicly, on YouTube, right? Because they have the best video on that little gadget. Um, and so the reason I have this burnt piece of toast is I like to think about them working on these devices as a chef or a cook would learn to make toast. You're gonna burn a couple of pieces, before you figure out how to make perfect toast. And so what we have to do is we have to plan for that messy part. We have to plan for that burnt toast. We have to plan for um, those instances where students come to me and go, I think I broke your device. And I'm like, oh, that device was $300. Thanks. But then we figure out that they didn't break it, but they do have it in a state where it's not operable right now. And so they get to work together with me to figure out, well, how do we recover that device? How do we get that thing reset? And how do we get you back on track? How do we update it? How do we flash it? And so they get to spend more time uh, going back to step zero. But because of all of those things, I think that they get a great learning experience through going through that. And so I think some of what I've really evolved at over time is every semester I do these hardware projects and I ask the students for feedback. They always say, wow, I loved it. This was my favorite, one of my favorite experiences out of all of my learning is to do this. But I wish I had more time. And so I've given them like 3 or 4 weeks of working on just this one tool. But there's always a push for us to, in our entire academic programs, to cover more content, right? Because there's always new stuff to learn. We need to add cloud, add containers, add this, add that. And and so we're always trying to add more and cram it into the same amount of time. But when we do that, we're giving up something. And so for some of my classes, I have to step back and say, no, I can't cram more in there because what I really want is I want to give more space for that experimentation. And if I only give them 1 week to experiment with a piece of hardware, they're not going to get nearly as much, they're not going to go nearly as far or nearly as deep in 1 week as they might in 3 or 4 or who knows 5 weeks maybe eventually. And so it requires a balance of figuring out your time. The other thing is the space. So I showed a couple of different labs, and so this is a very difficult one to handle for many institutions to have just like real estate. And so there is not an easy solution to this unless you can repurpose a classroom or if you have donated equipment. And so in these different labs, we can see that there is a variety of equipment and it runs the gamut between things that we purchased for decent prices and things that have been donated from industry partners and things that we have depreciated out of other labs. And so it is a constant flow of the equipment, but getting the space is something that can be very challenging. And I don't have a great solution for how do you get more real estate. Right. And then the last thing here of how to introduce hands-on to different environments is it takes the maturity to let the students struggle and um, let them do that soft failure. Um, and then to let them know that it's not about permission, it's more about the preparation. And so it becomes that a mutual trust to say that I've gone 4 years and I haven't had anybody do anything stupid or illegal. And so every time I start giving these gadgets or loaning these gadgets, toys or tools to students, it is a trust process, right? And so I think that that's kind of what we have to do. We have to let them get stuck, feel like they don't know how to do it, and then figure their way out of it. I think that builds a great graduate, um, and then just gives them a place to set up. So, in summary, I think hardware definitely matters. Um, and it's not something that should just be extra. There's all sorts of great things that come out of having hardware added into the program. I think if you skip hardware, then they skip a lot of experiences. And so it does take, that time, money, and space. But for that time, if we're allowed them the space to fail and figure it out, they get resilience. For that money, hopefully that your institution has to spend a little bit of money. Hopefully they're getting something unique that you're doing that maybe if they went to somewhere else or they chose not to go to an academic program at all, hopefully they're getting a unique value out of that because you are giving them something that they would not have gotten otherwise or elsewhere. And then that space that gives us a place to do the experimentation to in a safe environment, right? And so we're doing everything safely. If we're port scanning a network, it's a network we have permission to do. If we're jamming Wi-Fi, I've got permission to do it. If we are, and we're not really jamming Wi-Fi, we're doing like a DOF attack. Let me clarify that. But the hands-on mess, the struggle, the real gear, that's hopefully one of the reasons that they come to the institution that you have. All right, so that concludes my presentation. Oh, I got this on the wrong slide here.
So we have a couple questions.
Okay.
All right, so what is the range of the number of students per lab session that you have done?
So anywhere from as few as maybe 7, but more common is somewhere around 24.
Okay. Next question, what is Mercer University's strategy getting students to attend face-to-face classes?
So our strategy is that that's the only thing offered.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So next question, how did you get the students to share their experiences with their experiment attempts in a collaborative way with one another, or did they share it only with you?
Oh, yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Yeah, so at the end of those 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of them working on a tool, so there'll be different groups that'll have different tools. And so the deliverable is that they're going to get up and give a demonstration. And so they give their demonstration, and part of the requirements when they're giving their demonstration is they also have to talk about the experience along the way. And so they have to talk about what they were doing when they first got started. I require them to tell me some of the challenges that they had along the way. Um, and then I'll always ask them, follow-up questions. But one of the questions I'll ask them is, what else could you have done with this? And so by now, most of my students know that I'm going to ask that question. And so they think ahead and they'll go find something more that they could have done, even if they don't do it, just so they'll have a good answer when I ask them that question at the end. And so I also really encourage the students to ask questions to one another. And they're usually super engaged. I know sometimes when you have students doing projects and everybody did the same thing, everybody's like, oh, this guy did the same project. He read the same paper and wrote the same report I wrote. In this case, almost all of my students are working on a different piece of hardware, and not all of them ever had a chance to play with a Wi-Fi pineapple or a screen crab or whatever. And so they're just naturally interested because the topic is interesting and they didn't get a chance to use that tool.
All right, next question is, how do the students learn to build their experience and reflect on them according to your curriculum?
Yeah, so part of that is that, like again, that required reflection, and so it is a required component. And I'll have a good bit of scaffolding, essentially, that they have to fill out a report of their feelings, and I also force them to not only think about what happened, and to not focus just on technical errors, because if the power went out, that's not super useful long term. But think about the future. Like, because you did this project or you worked with this piece of hardware, what does that change about your future? What does that change about what you might think about for a career? And so I really want them to reflect forward. And then I'll see these same students in other classes, and sometimes they might take a research class where they would want to build further on something that they started in one of the earlier classes. That was the case for that honeypot project, where students started that in one project, in one course, and then they say, wow, this is so interesting. Can we keep working on it? And I said, yeah, if you want to keep working on it, go for it. And they took it further along than I could have done by myself. And so I got to also benefit from the things that the turns and twists that they benefited from. And then the other students get to benefit from it as well because they're walking by because they're here and they're seeing the logs of all of the attacks coming in. And so it just becomes a natural magnet as the presentations are interesting, as they see people walking around doing stuff with Wi-Fi or plugging in places. It just becomes like everybody's interested in what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, I really like that because it allows students, to work on or research skills and presentation skills too, and they could also, take that back to their student chapter and share that with their members too. So that would be another activity for them.
Yeah, and
Um,
then they'll even bring people that aren't cyber majors. Like, can my friend who's a business person, can they come to my presentation? I'm like, sure, yeah, come on. Right, just
that's
because they're
awesome.
just interested because they're like, oh, I've seen this Flipper Zero online. Can I watch what you're doing?
Yeah. Have any more questions from anyone? Well, this webcast is being recorded, so we're going to send out an email to everyone to the webcast recording. And I'd like to thank Mr. Yerby for the presentation and all the folks who signed up. And if you have any questions, Jonathan, do you have an email they can reach out to you?
Yes, it's my last name, Yerby_JM at mercer.edu.
Awesome. Thanks again, everybody, for attending today, and have a good day.
Thank you.